This is The Resilient Life, where we believe that every human will struggle in this life. Our challenge is to struggle well. I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war, my mom to cancer, and I'm the daughter of a retired Marine. I'm also a wife, mom, author, and president of one of the nation's leading veteran service organizations. Join me and some incredible guests as we explore the value of struggling well through life's inevitable challenges. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. I'm really happy I'm having the conversation today that I am with an incredible individual, Kirstie Ennis. And I was just telling Kirstie before that I learned her story on Jocko's podcast. As I was driving down to be a guest on Jocko's podcast, I was listening to your episode and I was blown away by your story, by your bravery, by your authenticity to really open up and share your experience. And so I knew when I started The Resilient Life, I knew I wanted you as one of my guests. So Kirstie, thank you for joining us here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
So I want to start out for those that are not familiar with your story. You joined the military at age 17, correct?
I did, yes.
So for those that don't know, when you join the military at age 17, you have to get parental permission to do that because you are not yet a legal adult. But you joined as a mechanic. An aircraft mechanic. So walk us through, let's start with your desire to serve. I'm the daughter of a retired Marine Corps colonel. So I understand how that can kind of get imbued in your bloodstream, but I'd love to know that path for you at 17 when you made that decision to say, I want to join the military.
Yeah, so I'll start with, I'm sure you've heard it already, but I'll start with my favorite story of all time. My mom and my dad got married at 18 years old, and shortly after my dad joined the Marine Corps. And when my parents were 27 years old and we were living on Marine Corps Base 29 Palms, I was 4 years old and my mom came home and told my dad, I think these female Marines are really badass. And my dad looked at my mom and said, I'll never be married to a female Marine. To which point my mom turned around, went out the door, went to the recruiter's office, got an age waiver and joined the Marine Corps. So the apple really doesn't fall too far from the tree in that regard. But really, my earliest memories are of my mom walking across the parade deck when she graduated in Paris Island, as a Marine. And then I used to come home every single day, get off the school bus and watch this documentary on Marine Corps boot camp. My Barbies wore dress blues and camis. And it was just something that I knew from a very, very early age that I was going to give my parents a reason to be proud of me, like I was proud of them. And I actually finished my high school curriculum by the time that I was 15, when we were living in the panhandle of Florida, Pensacola. I'm sure all the Navy guys and gals are super familiar. And I started community college. And 4 months after my 17th birthday, so I was just about to finish my AA degree. I just remember sitting in my chemistry lab and looking around the room and thinking, this isn't enough. I'm not being challenged. And I was getting pretty complacent with things. And I went to the recruiter's office, walked out of my class and sat down, and there was no convincing on their part. I sat down and said, hey, I want a Rubbermaid box like my parents have, that's full of the awards, the uniforms, the whole nine. And he told me what I needed to do. I went home, told my mom that I wanted to join and I needed to leave, now basically. And she pretty much said good riddance because I was a handful. And I ended up lying through my teeth to my dad to get him to sign. So my dad was artillery and then my mom was supply. And I swore up and down that I would do supply just like my mom. And sure enough, the day that my dad dropped me off for boot camp, my recruiter looks at him and says, hey, I've never put a female in for what she's trying to do and, the career path that she's trying to go down. So this is awesome. And when my dad found out what I was doing and where I would be going, needless to say, he didn't talk to me for 13 weeks of boot camp. But I just remember I don't know. I wanted to do something for the greater good. I admired the hell out of my parents for getting up every single day and sacrificing and putting on the uniform. And I wanted to, to follow in their footsteps.
I love that. And I always think, um, I talk about it a lot personally. Like, I did not join the military. I actually, for a long time, kind of shied away from that world. I didn't share with people that my dad was a Marine. When he left active duty, so he did 11 years active duty, 19 years reserve, and I didn't share that side of my life. Um, because I felt disconnected. I didn't feel like anybody even understood what that meant, right? And so I just find it so interesting. Now, on the flip side, my brother very much embraced the Marine Corps culture, and he was very much like you. He was um, wearing my dad's camis while we were down in North Carolina. There's so many pictures. Now, at a young age, when I was very young, I was very much into it. But when I got into high school, I wanted my dad to just be, a businessman, like all the other men that my friends' parents were. And it really was when my brother went to the Naval Academy and I saw him and he went into the Marine Corps that I kind of came full circle. And I'm like, this is something to be proud of and to understand and have pride in the choices and the decisions that not just my dad made for joining the Marine Corps in 1978, but my mom, who was the epitome of a Marine Corps spouse, a military spouse who, moved every 2 years with him, whose number one job was taking care of the family. And looking back, who was the person that made sure that our family unit was strong. And I always want to give credit to the incredible military spouses that are just as an important part of our military community as those who are serving. And then watching my brother and what he went on to do. You deployed for the first time when? So you go through boot camp at 17, you're there for 13 weeks, and then what does the next step look like for you? Because well, let's go back. What year is this? This is like 2011, 2012?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So obviously when you're joining, I mean, you're at the height of what's happening in our country. You certainly knew if you were joining the Marines, you were deploying. So let's talk about what that next phase comes after boot camp.
Yeah, well, so I mean, just like every other Marine, you go through boot camp, you go through whether it's SOI or your Marine combat training, you go on to your military occupational specialty schools, and I had two of them, being in the Air Wing. And when I first hit the fleet, I was actually assigned to Heavy Marine Helicopter Squadron 465, and all I wanted to do was deploy. And at that time, we were basically doing a joint deployment with a West Coast unit and an East Coast unit. So half of my unit was actually half of us was going to go on a MU, and the other half was going to go to Afghanistan. And I fought tooth and nail to go to Afghanistan. The last thing I wanted to do was go sit on a ship. And lo and behold, I got my way. And when I got out there, I fell in love with it. This is gonna sound quite bizarre, but just the simplicity of it. There was no question of what you're going to wear, what your hair is going to look like, what you're going to eat. You have one job, it will do your job well, but then most importantly, like, take care of your guys and come home safe. Take care of the people that have boots on the ground. As the Air Wing, like, our main focus is to support those men and women that are going around kicking down doors. And I felt just this overwhelming sense of pride, and I knew for a fact that that's where my heart was going to be, for the duration of my military career. And I was so wrapped up in it and just so enthralled by all of it that even when I came home, so that deployment was January 2011 to August 2011. And when I came home, I mean, I was so disconnected with what life was really going to be like when I came home. And I was just so obsessed with deploying again that I actually ended up doing a deployment 4 months later as a volunteer effort, and wanted to go back.
So you spend your first deployment in Afghanistan, and then 4 months later, you're back there again.
Yeah.
And I understand that I understand it from watching it. Again, Travis did a deployment, and then 6 months later, less than 6 months later, he was back in Iraq for his second deployment. And you as a family member, and I'm sure your parents did it, you wait with bated breath for them to come back, and then it's very fleeting, that moment. They're back, you're happy, and then it's like, well, wait, I'm going back again. And so I understand it from that side of things, but I also understand this desire. When Travis went on his first deployment, he was a logistics officer. And I remember him calling and having very different conversations with my dad. It was, I need to be more in the fight. Like I need to be out there. I'm, behind the wire. And for me and my mom, I was like thrilled about what his position was at that time. And, he came back and he talked about, he played a pretty significant role in the election. And so I think he felt a sense of pride with that, but he's watching all of his friends who are, playing different roles in infantry. And so he came back and he joined First Recon. And he, was like, okay, I'm going to be a logistics officer. I'm going to be with First Recon Battalion. And then found out that he was going to be attached to a MIT team. So he was going to be actively training the Iraqi army. And I've shared this before, but leading into that deployment, we knew that it was going to be different. And even kind of the hush conversations he was having with my dad, and it was going to be a different deployment, and we realized that right away. But I understand that desire. You've worked so hard. You want to be with your brothers and sisters out there. You want to be contributing to what's happening. And so you head back for that second deployment, and you find yourself on June 23rd, 2012. And I'd love to just kind of walk through, you were participating in what you've called a routine mission when you were involved in a helicopter crash. You sustained an injury to your leg that led to amputation, a traumatic brain injury, bilateral shoulder damage, full thickness facial trauma, cervical and lumbar spine trauma. And shortly after getting your leg amputated below the knee, you contracted MRSA in the hospital and had to amputate above the knee. And for those that don't know, there's a very significant difference between a below knee amputation and an above knee. Let's walk through that day. I again heard you share the story of that day with Jocko, and I was blown away. And I'd love for people to understand, what that looks like. You're on a routine mission. So you're on the plane, you're on the helicopter. Where are you going? Let's start there. Where are you headed?
Right. First and foremost, I mean, I also want to bring to light the fact that my first and second deployments were night and day as well. That second deployment, I was very fortunate to be able to pick up my my aircrew wings and obviously my combat action wings. And when I got out there in 2012, the things that I was doing were totally different than on my first deployment. And again, it was one of those things where I just became obsessed with flying. I became obsessed with doing combat resupply missions, with doing insertions and extractions, doing dread grades, doing prisoner transfer, all of that stuff. So it was a very big transition going into something that was, high speed, low drag compared to, what I was originally doing. And on June 23rd, 2012, I was just actually like 6 weeks away from coming home. I was supposed to be going outbound on a night mission, and it should have been, again, like you said, fairly routine. I was going to go out to Forward Operating Base Nowzad, go on to Musa Kalad, do an extraction of Marines, and then really just get back home. Just a bunch of combat resupply stuff, and bringing some Marines home safe and sound. Again, I should have been. Normally, we flew at night, and when I got my flight plan, good to go, I was going back to my shop, and then within a couple of hours, I get this message that there's been a change of plans, and it was just strange because we normally would never go outbound to do the things that we were doing in broad daylight. We would never be turning up our aircraft to do these things, at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and so it was like this overwhelming sense of just. Just so that the enemy can't spot us and track us. You know, obviously, if there's a critical mission, like we would go outbound during the day, but because this was something that's fairly routine, we're safer, you know, flying at night. And so it was, you know, it was just strange. And originally, you know, my aircraft was aircraft 01. You know, it's the one that had my name painted on the side. It's the one that I flew on day in, day out. And you know, I was running out to the flight line with my flight gear to aircraft 01, and my maintenance officer snatched me up and said, you know, there's been a change of plans. You're going to go outbound on this aircraft that was actually painted as a memorial aircraft for 6 Marines that we lost. And it was ironically aircraft 06. And that helicopter hadn't flown in ages, and we know we needed to turn it up. We needed to put flight hours on it to keep it up and active. And again, just a strange sequence of events, but you know, you do what you're told. And normally I was the lead aircraft. You know, we fly in sections most of the time, at least 2 aircraft at a time. And most of the time I was the lead aircraft. This time around, I was actually the trailing aircraft, the second aircraft. And there were just a bunch of things where it was just, I don't want to say misaligned or misconnected, but there was just, something was off about this day. But I mean, nonetheless, you know, we went out to the fuel pits, we tested our weapons, we you know, picked up 3 space available Army medics, and you know, started going back and forth between Camp Bastion into some other forward operating bases to drop off supplies. And when we were en route to forward operating base Nowzad, I mean, everything was just going according to plan. And before I knew it, you know, I felt the nose of the aircraft start to angle down a little bit, and it was a, you know, it was a brownout situation. The pilots couldn't see anything. There's a lot of distractions, a lot of chaos coming from the ground. We were being spotlighted, which is basically where the enemy on the ground blooms out our aircraft to signal to, you know, the next you know, location that the enemy's at is, hey, this is where they're at, and this is how they're coming. This is the flight path that they're on. Which isn't necessarily a big deal. I mean, it happens all the time, but it wasn't something, again, it was a strange evening, and the nose of the aircraft started going down, and then the nose of the aircraft started coming up real abruptly, and basically crash was imminent. And I was in the left door gun that night. At this point, we were going into darkness, and with my night vision goggles down, like I was just staring at the ground, and instead of like freaking out or you know, praying or panicking, I counted. It sounds silly, but I counted in my head as if the aircraft were landing normally. You know, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mains on deck. And of course, like in my head when it said mains on deck, you know, my weapon, the barrel of my weapon, my 50 cal, is going into the dirt. You know, coming back up and through my face, knocking me out. I'm laying in the dirt. Half my body is, you know, wedged between the tri-walls of the aircraft and the seats. I just went in and out of consciousness. And when I heard one of my pilots scream for my tail gunner, who really was like my military hero at the time, they couldn't find him. He was actually, he went out the back before we even hit the ground. I have no idea. I have no idea what was going through anybody's head at that point, and how that really happened. But when they couldn't find him and they couldn't wake him up, I just remember waking up and I just started to scream because I just wanted to find him. And then when I did that, I started to choke, and I rolled my tongue around my mouth, and it was just shattered jaw and broken teeth. And I had no idea that I had this fist-sized hole in my face. And, you know, like I said, lost my jaw, the whole 9. And I just remember thinking that, you know, I wasn't going to die without finding out where my tail gunner was. And then I wasn't going to die without saying bye to my little sister. And like from that moment on, everything just kept going in and out. And actually one of the combat medics, the Army medics that we had picked up, that was basically getting a taxi ride from us to one of the other operating bases, he got in front of me and kept me out of shock. And I remember trying to pull myself up, like to stand up with him. And that's when my arms ripped from the sockets. That's when like I realized that my leg was collapsing underneath me. And again, just went in and out, and they ended up loading me and my tail gunner. Thank God they found him. They loaded me and my tail gunner into the lead aircraft that we were flying with that night. And I just remember laying on the floor of this aircraft, and the other door gunner of the aircraft that we were on, he bent down next to me and he said, "Don't close your fucking eyes, because you won't open them again." And that's just for the next like 30 minutes. I just laid on the ground next to my tail gunner, and got covered in warm hydraulic fluid, unfortunately, and just told myself that, I was going to go back to flying, that they were going to sew me up and things were going to be fine. But like I said, I wasn't going to die without saying bye to my sister, and then everything went black. And the next thing I remember is waking up in this little makeshift hospital on Bastion, and I remember seeing my sergeant major and my gunnery sergeant standing there just staring at me and crying. And my gunny at the time, he really was a father figure to me. And he's actually the one that invited me to go on that deployment. And that's the moment that I knew that everything was over, that I was going home and that I wasn't going to finish out that deployment with my guys, that I wasn't going, I don't know, to continue flying. And I was devastated because I had just been like, it's very, very rare for a woman to have combat action wings with 3 gold stars, to have an Air Valor medal or any of that, let alone to be, combat meritoriously promoted to sergeant. So I finally, I felt like I had hit my stride in Afghanistan. I was ready to finish it out. And then before I knew it, I was on a plane to Kandahar and then to Germany and DC, and finally to Naval Medical Center San Diego, where I did the rest of my recovery.
Wow. There's some things I want to unpack here. First, going back to getting ready to get on that flight. And you kind of said it was supposed to be routine. It was routine, but there were some changes. Did you think about that after the fact? Like, as you were lying there, any of almost like you had this feeling that something was different? Did you ever have that feeling?
100%. Well, and there's 2 sides of that, I guess. So for a little while there, it was just, I was bitter and I was angry, specifically at my leadership for making those changes. Like, why couldn't that aircraft go out, on a training flight? Why couldn't that go out on a gun run just really quick to test weapons? Why wasn't I on my aircraft in the position that I was normally in? Oh, and to specify, to clarify a little bit further, the aircraft that I was loaded into was my aircraft. So 01, my aircraft with my name on the side in the lead position where I should have been.
The one that took you home.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was just like, there's so much, just, I don't want to call it irony, but there are just so many little omens or signs. But so for a little while there, I was like, well, why wasn't I just on my aircraft? Why wasn't I in the position that I'm normally always in? Why did we, change the flight plan? I thank God that we ended up picking up those, the Army medics, they're the ones that kept me out of shock and kept me and my guys alive. And so, yeah, it was just like this roller coaster of emotions for a little while there. But then also, I kind of counted my blessings that I was on aircraft 06, because, my call sign that night was actually Legacy 07. And the call sign of the 6 gentlemen that we lost at the beginning of that deployment, their call sign was actually Iron-Tail 06. And there is no doubt in my mind that I should not have lived. If you saw the photos of specifically my head trauma, I should not have come out of it the way that I did. And so there's no doubt in my mind that the boys of Iron-Tail 06 were watching over us and that aircraft that night and said, it's not happening today. So, in hindsight, there was some anger, but then there was also, I don't know, I guess the best word is gratitude.
Now, what was
it was given to me.
Yeah, no, the ultimate issue was mechanical failure within the helicopter?
No. Unfortunately, the easiest way to explain it without going too far into it is pilot error. It was human error.
Yeah.
And like I said, my heart goes out to the pilot specifically that was manning my aircraft that night, because he actually DOR'd. He dropped on request right off the bat. Never flew again. Got out of the Marine Corps, and I know that there was an overwhelming sense of guilt for him, and obviously responsibility. But I will give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. There was a lot going on. There was commotion taking place, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, my pilot choked.
So you talk about if you had seen the pictures, I shouldn't have lived. After I listened to your story the first time, I Googled you and I saw the pictures, and I mean, they're traumatizing to look at. And um, thank God for that army medic that told you not to shut your eyes, because I mean, there's no way you're not going into shock. Even if you can't physically see what you look like, you can feel it, right? Like you
Mhm.
feel that there's a hole in the side of your face. And so, I think about what that means as, and I don't want this to come off in the wrong way, but I've thought about it a lot when I first listened to your story as a woman, right? And this idea that um obviously you're going home. But how quickly does it come into your mind, like, what am I going to look like now? What is this going to, what does this mean for me um physically? And I'd love to know the process of how it goes. Like, okay, Marine Corps done. What is a thought process? I guess I will start there. What's the thought process that goes through your head? As and again, for those that don't know, when you leave Afghanistan, Iraq, when you're injured, most of the time you're headed towards Germany, right? And you start there, and then if you're lucky, you make it back to the States. But kind of talk us through that evolution, because there's obviously the physical injuries that you're most certainly dealing with, but I would think that very quickly the mental anguish and injury kicks in as well too.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think, I mean, that's kind of the crazy part too, is like, especially, and this, and not mean to be, offensive to anybody, but especially like the civilian sector, they look at me and they're like, holy shit, this chick is missing the majority of her leg. Like, that must be god awful, but they don't see, the scars that cover my body, or, how I try to hide the scars on my face and the whole nine. Like, they don't recognize that, the invisible injuries are far more debilitating than anything that I've had to overcome physically, hands down. I don't get me wrong, like there's tons of challenges with being an amputee. It's being like a toddler all over again. You literally have to relearn absolutely everything. But if you're suffering mentally and emotionally, you're not going to be able to do those things or relearn those things physically, period. So like, first and foremost, when they wheel me into this hospital and I see my gunny and my sergeant major, like, I don't give a shit about my leg. Again, in my mind at this point in time, like, they're just going to sew me back up and I'm just going to get to hang out with my buddies and we're going to go home, and we're going to ride this deployment out. But when they're crying and they're looking at me, like, that was the first blow, because now I'm leaving behind my guys. I'm leaving behind my entire identity and entire purpose at this point. Like, not only, am I not going to be able, to be in the fight, so to speak, but now I'm going to go home to the total unknown. I don't have a unit anymore. I'm clearly going back to a hospital, and so like, right off the bat, I have all of these emotions. Well, then a couple of the surgeons come up to me and they say, we're not even gonna touch your leg. Like, we have no idea how to even approach this situation. We're gonna
This is
leave
in
it there.
Afghanistan while you're
This is
still
all in Afghanistan. Mhm.
okay.
And then, the corpsmen are coming over to me again in Afghanistan. They're looking at my face and I'm like, holy shit, these guys better not touch my face, first of all, because my chin's going to be up by my eyeball if that's the case. And I got very, very lucky,
They're not looking
that
for
this
precision with the sutures on your face.
yeah, yeah.
They're just
I'm like,
looking to
oh
close up.
no. Yeah. Well, then there's this sweet little British plastic surgeon was actually out there, and she looked at everybody and was like, "No one touch her face. You guys can close up the other wounds. You can, work on everything else. But this is my patient when when it's all said and done." And thank God it was her that got a hold of my face. And once they like closed the open wounds, yeah, they loaded me up and sent me to Kandahar. And when I got to Kandahar, it was I mean, it was fairly brief, but I just remember like looking around, and I mean, there was no one like me there. I mean, there's no women there, there's, and not that that necessarily matters in the moment, but there's no women there. No one's talking to me. Everyone's just kind of staring at me. And the next thing you know, and I'm on a stretcher, of course, I'm cinched down, load me up. They put me on a plane to Germany. And I ended up being in Germany for a little bit, just so that they could actually stabilize me for the long flight from Germany up to DC. And my lungs kept sticking together. I was just having all sorts of random issues, and that was actually one of the first times that I got to call home. Well, my command, who again, I won't say too much about him, but my command, when they called home to my parents, they say, hey, your daughter's coming home. She has a cut on her chin, and her leg's messed up. But they don't say that she's losing her leg or anything. They don't say that I don't have a jaw or any of this. And so I get to talk to my mom on the phone, and she starts laughing. She's like, baby girl, I can't understand you. You must be on a lot of meds and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm pissed. You, mom. And I hang up the phone, and then I don't talk to my parents until I get stateside, because I'm like, I am that mad, like I'm in pain and I'm struggling, and no one's like no one's there for me, like that's what's going through my head. And then
Get to
Germany
go from Afghanistan, like, do you have any sort of buddy or someone that goes with you through this process? So you're just with brand new people in Germany, not that they're not part of the military, but like, you have nobody familiar with you in Germany.
Nobody.
Okay.
Nope. And then so finally I'm stable enough to move from Germany to DC. And I think that was the moment that I realized that that my life was going to be really, really challenging, moving that moment forward, because they loaded me on the C-17, and there's just racks of bodies, whether they're people like I was on the top rack because I'm the lightest. There's two dudes below me, and I look over the gentleman that was across from me. He's missing 3 limbs. There's 2 gentlemen underneath him, and there's just rows of people stacked on top of each other. And then alongside these cots, these stretchers, there's 30, 40 people on each side, and they're all just staring at us. They're able-bodied. There's nothing wrong with them. They're going home. They're just on the first flight out kind of thing. And everyone's just staring at me. And so I start to panic because, again, the only woman, I have no idea what I look like anymore. I can't walk. I can't move. I can't do anything. I can't function. And so, they ended up having to seriously sedate me to be able to get me finally to DC, because I'm like, get me the fuck off this plane. The last thing I want to do is be in the air after a helicopter crash that nearly took my life. And when I got to DC, they ended up declaring me a polytrauma and saying that, the best medical care that I could get would be in San Diego to address everything. And, once I made it to San Diego, that's when they finally decided that, they were going to try and do something about my leg, and they were trying to, do something about my spine. And I ended up enduring 46 surgeries. And, when it came down to it, like, I didn't really have an issue with the surgeries, I guess. When they told me what I was going to face, like every other week it was something, reconstructing my face, the stuff with my arms, the stuff with my ears, the stuff with my, like, I was totally fine with it. But like, what bothered me the most is, who's going to look at me differently? Am I going to be attractive enough to have a family? Will anybody find me attractive enough at all? And it wasn't even really about like the prosthetic. It was like looking down and realizing that, there's nothing there, or, looking in the mirror, that daily reminder of these scars on my face. And it was really hard for me to be able to wrap my head around that, which sounds very, very like petty, in the grand scheme of things. Because now it's like, oh, well, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to stay in the Marine Corps at this point. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to walk or run. And all I'm worried about is, is who's looking at me differently. And, like, I struggled. And, on one hand, I had this command come in. Actually, it was the commanding general of MCRD San Diego. And he comes in, and I had my heart set up for whatever sick reason. I had my heart set on being a drill instructor. And this gentleman came in and he said, you're going to be the first drill instructor with one leg. You're going to be the first drill instructor with one leg. All right, cool. And I rode that way for a long time. I fought for 2 years to stay in.
Yeah.
And so when, lo and behold, after that, that third finding of, unfit for duty, that I can't stay in because of the damage that was done, to my neck and up, that's when I really suffered. I got better. Again, physically, I overcame everything that was thrown at me. But then when they told me that purpose was really gone, that I was being forced into medical retirement, that it wasn't going to happen for me anymore, that's when I crumbled. So again, like the side of being a woman and, having the potential of, again, whether it's being a wife or being a spouse or, being a mom, whatever that was at the time, then rolling into what the fuck am I going to do? I gave 6 years to my country starting at 17 years old. That's all that I knew. Don't get me wrong. I had a master's degree at that point in time and whatnot, but everything that I loved and cared about, my identity, I felt like I was robbed, robbed of years of my life, robbed of my career, robbed of my memory, my leg, the whole nine. So when we're talking about just like the recovery and the injuries themselves, losing a leg was nothing in comparison to the trauma that people suffer internally.
Well, and when you look at it, the leg, was actually not what prohibited you from staying in the Marine Corps. And so that's the first thing you see when you look at a picture of you. It's she's missing her leg, right? But it was everything else that was actually what had you medically retire from the Marine Corps. Yeah, and you have to process with what, and I went through that when Travis was killed. It was like, what does my life look like now? What do I do from here? Everything I did prior to Travis dying, it felt empty. And so it was a little bit different. Like I felt like I had to find something that brought me higher purpose, because everything I thought I was a mom, a newly married mom that ran a clothing store. And I was perfectly happy with that. And then after Travis died, it felt so empty to me. And I remember folding a pair of designer jeans that I had waited probably a year and actually had talked to Travis about while on deployment, that I had scored this big brand in my store. And those jeans showed up about a month after he was killed, and I'm folding the jeans, and it was this total feeling of I can't do this anymore. And within 2 months from there, I had closed my business down because I knew that like everything had changed, right? And so you had to redefine your purpose and what that means, and what you do, and what you represent as a female, a female to the military community, because there's still a lot on your shoulders too. You have to think about it. Like you're no longer in the Marine Corps, but you still have to represent, right? Like in some ways, did you feel like they were counting on you not to fall apart? Did you feel abandoned? Like how was the feeling when you medically retired, and your connection to the Marine Corps at large?
Well, first, I want to commend you for bringing something up, and it's something that's never, no one, on the dozens of podcasts that I've done now at this point, no one's ever brought it up, or at least made me think about it. Earlier you had mentioned something about the differences between you and your brother, and I have a little sister that's 7 years younger than me, and we couldn't be any more different. She, anytime anybody would ask her if she was going to join the Marine Corps, she'd get mad, like absolutely not, like I want nothing to do with it. And just, that desire to serve for her wasn't there. So when you were talking about that earlier, that reminded me of her. And even just now, some of the stories that were shared with me from my family after I got hurt. They continue to shape my life every single day. My little sister, when I got hurt, she was 14 and made some very, very huge, 13 really, sacrifices to be able to sit by my side, because my parents couldn't afford to sit with me in the hospital. And, she made some very, very adult decisions. But when I was really suffering and struggling, again, mentally and emotionally, she needed to get help of her own, because she was saying that, I don't see a point in living if my sister is not living, and she's not living to the ability that she could be. And so to hear you say some of the things, that just it brought up a lot of emotions. And I guess which is a nice little piggyback into the rest of it. Because when I hear those things, of course, no one's telling me that right off the bat, that there are people looking to me, like my little sister or my family members. But when I did find that out, that was just, another reason not to throw in the towel, because I suffered with a lot of demons. And for a long time, I did not talk about them, even though I probably really should have and needed to. But when it came down to it, after I did try to take my life, a year after my helicopter went down, to the day, a year after my helicopter went down, my dad came to me and he said, you got to be shitting me. The enemy couldn't kill you, and now you're going to do it for them. And that's probably the first time that I really felt that. I don't want to say pressure or responsibility, but that I really had to get it together for myself, because there were people watching, whether it's family members of the men and women who never made it home, whether it's my peers, my fellow brothers and sisters, whether it's people that I've never even met who are in the hospital dealing with the same things that I was, that I've dealt with, whether it's civilian or military. When it's all said and done, even if I'm not wearing the uniform, I still had a lot to uphold, because there were still a lot of people looking to me. And I'm glad I had that realization, because that's what, every single day, that's the reason I keep doing what I'm doing.
So you said it pretty quickly, and I kind of want to, I want to bring it back so everybody heard it correctly. On the 1-year anniversary of what people who are injured in wartime affectionately call their Alive Day, right?
Right.
It becomes a day to celebrate, like, you're here, you made it. It's another year that you made it, right? And I have a lot of friends I congratulate on their Alive Day and say, glad you're still with us. Keep up the good work, But on your first year Alive Day, you tried to take your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to think about this idea that for that year, with everything you were going through physically, your mental state took such a hit that you wanted out. And I think I have a lot of things that my Marine Corps father has said to me that have snapped me out. And I loved that when I read that your dad said, you got it. The enemy couldn't get you, and now you're going to, do it to yourself. And sometimes that's all it takes, is that one line, that one moment where someone says something and it changes things. And it's like, okay. And it's not that easy, right? It's not like, oh, he said that to me and I was fine. And, but sometimes it just takes that one moment to have that wake up call, that slap in the face, to kind of bring yourself out and say, okay, what comes next? And so, you've been an incredible advocate now to the military community, an incredible representative. And I hope that today you are proud of how you represent the Marine Corps as an amputee, as a female, and as someone who talks so openly about their story. What does it look like for you today? Where are you today in terms of all of that?
Yeah, well, so I know for a little bit there when we were talking, it was pretty grim. It took me a long time to even get to the point of celebrating my Alive Day. For years it was very dark, and it was one of those things where my mom would beg me not to even drink a beer and to wrap myself in bubble wrap, kind of thing. I'd say over the last 5 years, I've come to grow very, very appreciative of what happened to me. Because I could be pissed off. I could be forged with anger about what happened to me, because again, of all the loss and everything that I've suffered and endured. But without those things, I wouldn't be where I am now. The reality is, it's probably the biggest blessing that's ever been, thrown my way, because of my new perspective on life, and the way that, I have this very unique platform to be able to, to give back and to serve others and to support people in ways that I never even dreamed of. I was devastated when I was forced into that medical retirement, because I felt like I wasn't going to be able to serve people anymore. But now I'm serving people, I don't want to say in ways far greater, but in much different and much bigger ways than I was before. So again, thanks to those injuries and the damage to my leg, this Florida girl ended up, competing alongside Team USA in snowboarding, board across and bank slalom. I was 5th in the world. The USASA national champion in snowboarding of all things with this damage to my leg. Having never been on a snowboard before, I've gone forth and I climbed the tallest mountains in the world. I have earned 3 masters and a doctorate with the brain injury, even though doctors told me, absolutely not, like you'll never be able to do it. I own small businesses. I run my own nonprofit now. And, had, again, these really awful, terrible things not happen to me, I would not be on the trajectory that I am, right now. So again, I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing now. So at the end of the day, I'm grateful.
I think they call that post-traumatic growth, right?
And that's one of my favorite terms, because for the longest time, that's all that anybody talked about was, PTSD, post-traumatic, stress and the symptoms that were related to it. But, no one ever talked about, what could come of it. So I love that phrase.
Yeah. Well, you are an incredible example of what post-traumatic growth is. I want to shift here because I could not have this conversation with you without talking to you about where we are today. And, just 2 days ago, our president announced that the war in Afghanistan is over. He said that. Many people don't share that sentiment with him. But I'd love to know where you are, because this has to drum up a lot of things for you. I know I'm personally connected to what's happening because I've lost a lot of friends in Afghanistan. I have a lot of friends that were severely injured in Afghanistan, and I have friends that were SIVs. Some that made it on a plane, and some that are still sitting in Afghanistan. And so I know the range of emotions that I have gone through over the past couple of weeks. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how you're feeling about everything.
Yeah. So when I first heard the initial news of what was taking place in Afghanistan, well, specifically the Taliban, taking over all of Afghanistan, when they went into Kabul, and I was glued to the TV, which is probably a terrible thing to do at the time.
Ditto.
Yeah, God, I was so addicted to social media and just reading all of the news and everything. That first day, I was really numb, and then it hit me, this world of emotions. And I was angry on one hand. I was embarrassed for our country because the rest of the world is watching. This country that is the world leader. My heart broke for all of the men and women who have sacrificed, who never made it home to their families. The innocent people that are still there, like you said, the SIVs, the people who are loyal to us, the people who are going to continue living in fear, the whole nine. And so for days, I was in a really, really bad spot. And then, things, started to level off, and, I really started to try to focus on, controlling what I could control. And then, of course, the attacks at the gates that took 13 lives and wounded dozens and dozens and dozens of our people, and then of course the innocent Afghans. And I hit that downward spiral again, just because it was, I never felt like it was for nothing by any means. I don't feel like anybody, died in vain. I don't feel like anybody, sacrificed in vain or any of that. It was just, it hurt me because it was done incorrectly. And like I said, we gave a lot of hope to a lot of people. We did a lot of really, really amazing things for the people of Afghanistan. And to me, the thing that sat so heavy on my heart was you know, there are kids who grew up knowing what independence was and what a little bit of freedom was, who are now going to um, live in hell, for
Yeah.
lack of better terms, moving forward. We gave people who were truly oppressed hope. We gave them independence again. We gave them freedom. We gave them the ability to learn, to drive vehicles, to go out and get, like, earn careers, to provide for their families and to live without fear. And now they're going right back into it. And I think that's the part that hurts the most. Is I really wish that we would have followed through with taking care of the innocent people, and most importantly, taking care of obviously our U.S. military, our U.S. citizens, but our allies. I mean, there's a lot of people over there that sacrificed alongside us, that were loyal to us, that helped us for the last 20 years, and we left them. And I think that's the hardest part of all of it, because I know post 9/11 vets, like it's been hard, because it's inevitable to question, why did we lose our buddies? Why did we sacrifice years of our lives in multiple deployments? But I think when it's all said and done, like, I mean, it was worth it, because of being able to liberate those people for the time being. And so now I think it's just being able to justify the actions and the poor planning of the government, which I don't think any of us should be surprised by the poor planning of the government, but that's kind of where I'm at with all of it now.
Well, I think you hit on something, and I share every sentiment that you just spoke, just so you know. But one of the things that I actually was talking to a friend of mine who's a Marine, colonel, still active duty, serving overseas right now. And, we were having this conversation around this idea. And if I see one more person, right, we should have been out of Afghanistan 10 years ago, or what a waste of lives. I mean, and I've had some Gold Star sisters and spouses who have been very silent for very long, really hitting back at people that are kind of putting this rhetoric out there when they have no comprehension or understanding of, number one, just how deeply hurtful it is to make comments like that. But number two, who has no understanding of what was happening over there. And one of the things that I thought was so poignant about what my friend said is, he shared with me, all these people saying, it was for nothing, right? The last 20 years for nothing. He's like, well, I did 5 combat deployments in Afghanistan. And every single one of my Marines that was on that deployment with me saw the fruits of what we were doing over there. Every single one of them saw the smiles on the children's faces, saw how we were enabling them to live in a relatively free society. And again, it's over, right? Like, that's gone. We've now catered to a group that is, not designated terrorist organization, but let's be honest, they're going to be killing our allies in the streets, and we know that, and we can turn a blind eye. And one of the things that's so interesting, because we were supposed to talk last week, and it was too hard to have this conversation, right? And so having this conversation today, when it's like, I heard the president speak and say, I've ended the war in Afghanistan, and on some levels, you see people again that don't really have a comprehension of what the last 20 years signified, almost celebrating like, thank God, finally somebody got rid of this war. But the other thing that I noticed that was just a sign of our society is that speech was given, and the next day it was no more 24-hour news cycle on Afghanistan. And now this is where the really terrible things are going to start to happen, and we're just not paying attention. Just like our society largely did not pay attention for the last 20 years, and they want to come back around, right now and say, oh, thank God it's done. Like, thank God it's done. You have no idea. And the other thing that my friend said, he said, I did 5 combat deployments. I was gone for years and years from my family. And he said, and if I have to listen to people say, oh, our society's war weary, we have to get out. He said, I served countless years back and forth to Afghanistan and back. If I'm not war weary, why are they war weary? What have they
Right.
contributed to this issue? You know, and I'm like, that's so true. He's like, you're not war weary. You lost your brother in Iraq and you continue to work with servicemen and women each and every day. You're not war weary. You're out there demonstrating what it means to be a injured, disabled Marine, you know, making sure you're bringing light. Like, if we're not war weary, then how are these people that have no connection, this 99%, why are you war weary? Like, I don't get it, you know?
No, absolutely. Well, and I mean, that's even one of the reasons that, like I told you earlier, I had to step away from social media and everything, because everybody has an opinion. And 99% of the time, especially with what I was seeing, it's uneducated. They have no idea what's going on. They have no reason to really feel the way that they're feeling. They're repeating what they saw on TV, or they're repeating what their friends have said. And so, to your point about, about a society that's being more weary, for what? Because there's a very small fraction of people who have served in the military, and an even smaller fraction of people who have gone to Afghanistan. And I can guarantee right now, any one of the men and women that serve with me in Afghanistan, we'd go right back if we could right now. We have been hurt by seeing all of these opinions, by seeing what's going on over there. And I have never seen a lack of patriotism the way that I have overall, again, in our society, but a rise in patriotism in veterans and the active duty space. I am so devastated by what happened to those 13 that we lost, but to see the amount of love and the outpouring of support that those families are getting, it gave me a little bit of hope. We'll just put it that way, and it kind of restored at least some of my faith in our society and where it stands right now.
Yeah,
I don't know. It breaks my heart because there's so much cowardice and so many people who have lost their spine, and people who have just been totally like lost their way in doing what's right. So,
well, from someone who has never served in the military, I can say that I thank you for your service. I thank you for being part of a community that has kept the enemy from our door for the last 20 years. And I think that is, trying to think about how I want to say this. I think that the ties that bind us as a military community are something that the average person will never understand. And
absolutely.
It's a blessing and it's also a curse, because they won't ever understand it and they can't ever understand it. But we know that bond, and especially in the Marine Corps. I'm obviously very partial, but there's something different about that Marine Corps brotherhood, sisterhood, and that community lives by Semper Fidelis every day. And so the idea that after losing 11 of their own, 11 Marines, Navy corpsman, and soldier in the Army, they got on that plane and weren't able to accomplish that mission of bringing everyone home that they had set out to do. It's a slap in the face to what our military represents. And trust me, it was not those 22, 23, 24-year-olds on the ground that made that decision, right? And so I hope that we as a country can push through the rhetoric, because you don't have to look too far to actually see what's really going on, right? And if you watch the mainstream media and that's all you watch, then you're not going to get it. You're not going to understand. But talk to a Marine, talk to a service member. That's what I was saying. You want to know what it's like to serve in the Marine Corps? And there's actually this viral video going around that one of the Marines posted. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about 8 minutes long. And he basically, I don't know if he was wearing like a GoPro on his head, but it's the last 2 weeks of him in Afghanistan. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's them sitting in, smoking cigarettes and, joking around with each other and folding chairs, riding bikes. It's showing the toilets and how they're overflowing with crap. But then it's also showing, how they're having to set off smoke blasts to push the crowd back. It's showing babies crying. It's showing Afghans that are passed out from heat. And it's this perfect image of what the last 2 weeks was for these men and women. And I'm sure once you watch it, it's also a reflection of some of your time there spent on 2 deployments in Afghanistan. And those are the things that America needs to see. Those are the images. It's not always pretty, right? But that's what they need to understand is representative of what our service members represent to this country. If you could have anything, if you could think of anything that you would want our leadership, and when I say leadership, our government, I don't know if you want to call them leadership, but our government or the general public, those that are not connected, if there's anything you would want them to know, as a veteran of Afghanistan who gave her limbs to this country, who gave her career to this country, who had to start all over again because of the service to this country, what would you want that to be?
Well, even though sometimes it hurts to say it, I just want to say that the American people and the Afghan people are worth it. And that's really it. I mean, you kind of touched base on it a minute ago. We kept that from coming here for 20 years. And if people can't see anything beyond that, at least be grateful for the men and women who did have the courage to serve our country during that 20-year span. Because I really think that we're going to endure a lot of change and a lot of scary times moving forward. So, like you said, my career, my injuries, the American people and the Afghan people were worth it.
Well, thank you for that, Kirstie. And, one of the things, I don't know if you read General Berger's, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, his letter to the Marines that he put out. Probably, I mean, the days are all melding together at this point, but I think it was probably about 10 days ago, just over everything that was happening in Afghanistan. And one of the lines that I keep repeating is he says, does this hurt? Yes, it does. Was it worth it? Yes. And it was worth it. I'm going to finish with the last question I ask everybody who joins us as a guest on the Resilient Life. And I think this entire conversation represents that. But if you could sum it up, what does living a resilient life look like for you?
Oh, man. I mean, there's two sides of that, I guess. I mean, living a resilient life, it's on one side, it's my mantra, it's the 6 inches between your ears and what's behind your rib cage that dictate what you're capable of. But really, again, like you said, this whole conversation has really embodied all of it. But, you keep your head and your heart in the right place. You really can overcome absolutely anything.
Kirstie, thank you so much for joining us. Awesome conversation, one that I know so many people are going to appreciate. And I'm just so honored that I had the opportunity to join you and listen to everything that you have to say. And I wish you so much fortune in the future. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep speaking out. Keep being a pillar of hope and light for the Marine Corps, for females, for everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us for another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Kirstie, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.